naturally have it.
How do you know
that? You don't just have people just all of a sudden, from infancy, from birth, believing in this supernatural being with all of the lovely attributes that he possesses.
How do you know that?
People are taught that.
How do you know that? How do
I know that? Because if you put any child on this earth and just raise them in a completely non-religious environment, which is impossible in our society today, because eventually they're going to have to go to school and they're going to have to associate with other people who hold these beliefs. But at any rate, they do not naturally have this belief. It's taught to them. That's why people go to church, and that's why you send your children to little indoctrination camps. Okay, so you don't have any evidence. Now, you talk about the scientific method, you talk about producing facts and things like that, and you assume that atheism is a default position, and you can't even verify it. Okay. You are the one making the claim that this particular God exists. You made the claim atheism is a default position. I made the claim that there is no evidence. Okay, which is an illogical thing to do, which I've already demonstrated why it's illogical. I'm asking Matt, I would like to be able to finish my sentences. Go ahead. Okay. So, the only claim I made was that there's no evidence that points to any kind of supernatural being. None? You know, the fact that I'm an agnostic atheist means that I admit that someday some evidence might turn up, because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But right now, today, there's no evidence that points to the existence of your God. It's your job to prove it, because you're the one who has the belief. I don't have a belief. I have no belief, lack of belief in God. So I can't disprove your God any more than you can disprove the existence of Frodo Baggins. Of what? Frodo Baggins from Lord of the Rings. Oh. Lack of belief. Well, my cat's lack of belief also. But you have, you said no evidence points to God. There is no evidence, which is a statement basically of omniscience. It's just a self-defeating position that you have. Now, back to this idea that atheism is the default position. Do you have any scientific proof for this, besides your opinion? I don't want your opinion. Do you have any evidence? Proof. Do I have evidence for the fact that atheism is the default position? Yeah. How do you know children are born with the idea of believing in God? Because there would be no other way to explain the proliferation of different God beliefs throughout all of history, based on culture, based on time period, if that wasn't the case. That every single culture and every time period has taught their children to believe in certain beings. So every culture basically believes in God. It seems kind of a natural thing, doesn't it? The theory of mind occurred 3 or 4 years old. Got some coaching there? Oh, no, Brian was just telling me about an interesting study. Well, you don't. Scientific study called the theory of mind. I'll tell you what. You want to get Brian on for another show? We can tackle him, and we can do presuppositionalism. That'll be great. But I'll tell you what. You don't have any evidence for that. It's an assumption you're making. And what I see. Hold on, let me finish. I've just received new evidence. It's an inconsistency in your. There has been a scientific study done that shows that they're actually incapable of understanding the concept of God. So Google theory of mind. Okay. Hold on. Look, I'm not debating him. I'm talking to you. Now, if you need but that's fine. Okay. But I've already admitted that I don't possess all of the knowledge in the world. Great. So you're asking me for evidence, and I'm giving it to you, and so now you're rejecting it because it's coming from Brian? What evidence? No. That's called a genetic fallacy, and no. I'm not doing that. I'm asking you a question. Now I'm asking you to demonstrate to me how you know for a fact that atheism is a default position with a child. You can't prove that. I told you at least one study, and also we can look at historical evidence, like I just explained, and the different gods that people have believed in based on their culture, based on their individual family, and based on the time period that they're raised in. All that demonstrates is that they're taught. Okay, get Brian away, please. Come on. If you can't handle, look. If you want, Brian, you want a piece of me? Let's arrange a time for you and I to have a one-on-one discussion, okay? But for now, Kelly, why don't we continue our discussion here? So, you know, the issue of, look at my notes here. So, how do you know, let me just ask you this, how do you know your position of atheism is true? there's no evidence to point to any other belief. Therefore,
there's no evidence?
It is true based on the evidence that we have. Just like the theory of gravity is true based on the evidence that we have, that you can go outside and you can drop something and it will fall every single time. That's how we make decisions. That's how we decide what's true and what isn't. We use the evidence available to us at the time to make a decision.
Okay, I've already demonstrated or gone over the issue of to say that there is no evidence is not a logical thing you can claim.
Well, you haven't presented me with any, so if there is evidence, then present it to me.
Okay, I'm trying to tell you something here. You cannot say logically and validate it that there is no evidence. The best you can do is to say that the evidence that you have seen is not convincing enough for you. That's logical and that's fair. But you keep going back to these authoritative statements, which you cannot verify in a scientific method. How do you verify...
Well, then change my mind.
Okay, Kelly, how do you verify a negative? It's proving... you're supposed to know philosophy.
No, I'm not proving a negative. And actually, if you recall, in my very first statement to you, I said, any evidence that is available to us today, there is none that points to a supernatural being. So I already included...
Well, there is evidence that points.
Well, then tell me what it is, and maybe you'll be the lucky one to change my mind today.
Well, I don't think I can change your mind.
So you're making an excuse based on the fact that you don't think you can change my mind, so you're not even going to bother?
No, that's putting words in my mouth, and I didn't say I wasn't going to bother. I'm just trying to tell you that proof is different than persuasion. I could make a logical proof for God's existence. It doesn't mean it's going to persuade you. I can give you rational...
I don't want a logical proof. I want you to point me to something material that proves his existence. I want you to point me to something...
I know why you say that.
That shows to me that it must have come from some supernatural entity.
I can't do that.
I mean, you're claiming, well, if you can't do it, then why do you believe it?
I believe it not because there's a scientific method where I can weigh a proof, measure a proof, observe a proof, and then conclude God exists. That's what you're asking, and that's not how it works. So what you're asking me to do is by...
Why isn't that how it works? Does God interact in the natural world, or does he not?
I need to finish. What you're asking me to do is logically impossible, outside the criteria in the realm of discovering God's existence. If God exists, then the evidence for his existence would be those things that do not comport with the naturalistic worldview. You would have to assume that, for example, logically, that if God did exist and there was evidence of him in the world, that we would assume that those evidences, those things we would see, would be problematic. That we'd have to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? For example, we would have to say that somebody walking on water would be a difficult thing to explain in a naturalistic term. Whether or not it happened or not isn't the issue. These are the kinds of categories that we have to look at. Miraculous, raising from the dead, walking on water.
So it would have to be something that is not in line with something that can be better explained using natural... the reasons why we know that these things occur.
Now, Kelly, let me continue here. Would you not agree with me then that if someone did walk on water and raise others from the dead and raise himself from the dead, if it were true, I'm not saying it is or isn't, but just trying to help you out here, if that was proclaimed an evidence within reason, would it not be a form of evidence for something that we might call the supernatural? Or would you just assume it can't be true?
If something like that happened, and it could not be explained using science, there was no explanation, then that would be an example of something that could potentially...
Then how would you test it?
Be, supernatural or from some other being outside of the universe.
How would you test it?
How
would you test it?
My phone keeps beeping in my ear, and I just missed what you said.
I'm sorry. No problem. I said, how would you then test it? You have a scientific method, right? How would you test someone walking in water, raising from the dead, when you have a bunch of eyewitnesses recounting it and telling you? You would say, I won't believe it. You might say, well, I've seen that. Or people might come to you and say, you might be walking around a corner downtown, and a whole bunch of people might come around and say they saw an unusual something in the sky. And you can say...